Okay, good afternoon. We'll call the meeting to order. We have, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Senator Byrd, Senator Carroll, Senator McDaniel, Senator Mills,
Here.
Senator Neal, Senator Nemus,
Present.
Senator Wilson, Senator Bojanowski, Representative Bojanowski, Representative Fleming,
Present.
Representative Graham,
Here.
Representative Petrie,
Here.
Representative Pratt, Representative Tipton,
Here.
Representative Weber, Mike Harmon, John Hicks, Victor Maddox, Sharon Mattingly, Senator Higdon,
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Again, welcome everyone and thank KET for being here today. That's not always the case, but we're glad to have you today. This committee does do some very good work. With that said, need the approval of the minutes. Have a motion to approve the minutes. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. First order of business today is the Judicial Forum Retirement System. Bo Craycraft, the floor is yours, young man. Introduce yourself for the record and please proceed.
Make sure we're on there. Just a second here to pull up our presentation. All right, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Bo Craycraft, and I'm the Executive Director of the Judicial Forum Retirement System. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today and present. I have been asked to provide a quick date on a couple of things. First, recent investment and cash flow information from both our plans, update on the most recently completed 2023 regular session and legislation that impacted our plans, and then lastly, an update with regards to House Bill 76 implementation, a bill passed during the 2022 regular session, which requires a review of economic assumptions. Slides 2 and slides 3 begin the investment portion of our presentation. We've included both February and March, but for the sake of your time this morning, I was going to focus on slide number 3 and March 31, since that was the most recent results. For the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, which you can see in that third column titled FYTD 23, you can see that for the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, 9 months in, the plans have produced pretty attractive results in response to what was a disappointing fiscal year 22. I'd also, point out this is an interesting point in time, as you can look at a fiscal year-to-date return of about 8.5%. If you move to the next column, for the last 12 months, the plans have actually lost about 5%. So that just tells you, number one, I know a lot of times we've talked about, looking at a single point in time can be difficult when you're dealing with these large plans. But it also tells you that the last quarter of fiscal year 22 was a tremendously impactful, both on a numbers basis, but it was a tough month. Our plans alone saw their equities drop 15% just in that 3-month period. So still showing a negative result for the 1 year, but as you look out over the 3, 5, 10, 20, and 30, for those plans that have that history, you can see they've consistently been able to provide a return that's above benchmark. And I always like to look at the trailing 5 year, especially as we're heading into a actuarial valuation period, because returns and gains and losses are smooth over a 5 year period. So you can see over the 5 year, the larger legacy assets have been just a little bit above 10% over a trailing 5 year. So hopefully, three months left in this current fiscal year. Hopefully it won't be as dramatic as the end of last fiscal year. Slide 4 is just a cash flow snapshot as of the end of February. We weren't quite able to close out the month of March from a accounting standpoint, so this is the 8 months ending February 28th, comparatively between the current fiscal year 23 and the prior 8-month period that ended February of 2022. A couple of things just quick to point out is, given, and we've said this at previous meetings, given the funding level of both judicial and legislative retirement plan and the employer contributions that have been requested, we've seen those employer contributions come down, and thus we expect to see some negative cash flow. And so you can see in that gray shaded net cash flow before asset gain losses that the plans have experienced negative cash flow across both 22, 23. The current fiscal year we actually saw a little improvement, which is largely driven by increased investment income from dividends and bond payments. Now, that's been offset somewhat with the realized gain losses, and as expected with the current fiscal year, we've seen better results on the investment side. So the realized, unrealized net asset gain has been quite a bit higher, and so both plans, as it stands today, as of the February 28th, have been able to add assets and increase their net position. With that, that's really, as far as the investment and cash flow portion. I've got a couple slides. Just want to take any questions now.
Yes, Senator McDaniel has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bo, just real briefly, explain the difference between realized and unrealized asset gains.
Yeah, so realized is anything that's effectively been sold, right? And we've realized, if I own a security, I bought it, I'm reporting it as of today's value. If I currently still hold it, that's unrealized, right? We haven't executed that. I bought a stock at $10, it's now $20. I would have an unrealized gain of $10.
How do we book the value of a bond that potentially could have a lower sale price due to rising interest rates that may have been bought, kind of like we've seen recently, a fairly dangerous scenario?
Yeah, most of us were mark to market, right? So all of our fixed income assets are largely corporate. They're priced, and so they're based on a fair value. So as rates have gone up, the value of the portfolio has gone down. Now, in our case, we're not selling bonds. So as long as we hold that to maturity, we're going to get, the yield and the full par amount. And so in our case, we haven't had to sell anything, although the value of the unrealized gain or loss has changed on that side.
And you do book it as it goes?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Monthly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
All righty. Slide 5 is just a quick update with regards to the most recently finished legislative session. There were a handful of bills that had an indirect or maybe a cursory impact on JFRS, but for today, I really just wanted to focus on House Bill 236. That was the only piece of legislation that really had a direct impact on us and requires some action. The board had discussed this bill, and I know Senator Mills had a similar bill that had been introduced prior. And we had talked about here at this committee, and so the bill had been discussed prior in January at our board meeting. We also just recently had our most recent quarterly board meeting on Friday afternoon, so this was the topic of discussion. The board just wanted me, first and foremost this afternoon to just clearly articulate that the JFRS board has always taken their fiduciary duty very seriously. And they've always acted in the sole interests of JRP and LRP members. Secondly, I know a lot of the members of this board are aware that there are differences between JFRS, TRS, KPPA. However, specifically with the investment side, we just wanted to highlight that with regards to investment management, we don't have a staff of investment professionals like TRS and KPPA. The board has partnered with Baird Trust Company, which was formerly known as Hilliard Lyons, and they've served as the board's sole investment provider. Baird's contractually acknowledged their fiduciary duty in the contract since day one, and they have a very long history, which now dates back over 30 years of providing our members with consistent and really measured and above benchmark returns. So, they are a sole investment provider. They have discretion over what assets we buy, what assets we sell. They also are very involved with the asset allocation side of things. And so the board just wanted to, make sure that, we clearly articulated that there were differences. As our sole investment provider, Baird does vote our proxies. They do have an approved policy. The trust company has their own policy, which is separate from their mutual fund line of business. And so the board is contemplating, House Bill 236 allows them to either adopt their own policy or to adopt that of their sole investment provider. And so staff is working alongside with some, other third party, our legal counsel, just to see what makes the best sense for us. But we plan to do that in July. As far as the bill is concerned, a lot of the reporting aspects that were required, we're prepared to meet. And so it really won't be a ton of, there won't be a ton of impact as far as how we're doing business. Again, Baird has always managed in the sole interest. There's no environmental, social, or governance aspects to how they screen stocks. And so, but we will be, handling some of that proxy side of things. And then lastly, the last slide, slide 6, just highlights a few upcoming actuarial activities. The board is prepping for their full funding valuation, which will be conducted as of July 1, 2023. I know we talked about this back in November, but we do funding valuations every other year on the odd numbered years in preparation for the biennial budget. So July is a big meeting. July 2023 will be a big meeting for our board as they will review economic assumptions. They've always incorporated a review, but with the passage of House Bill 76, this will be more of a bit more formal process. They're going to have, USI, which is our third-party actuary, as well as Baird, provide an update on, capital market assumptions, our current targeted asset allocation, and then also, we'll take a look at what, the trend in the industry is with regards to assumed rate of returns. Now, with regards to economic assumptions, really our assumed rate of return, or what you might often hear called the discount rate, or the rate used to discount the liabilities, it's really our only economic assumption. With the passage of our housekeeping bill in 2022, we've moved to a level dollar amortization method. So we don't have the payroll growth assumption that I know this committee and board has spent countless hours talking about, and the impact it can have on the employer contribution. That's effectively, we're at zero. And so there really will be no review of that, whereas some of the other plans, that would be an economic assumption that's discussed. Lastly, the board also has asked USI to take a look at the recent recommendations that were made by Milliman during the actuarial audit that was presented here in February. And so during that July meeting, we're going to take a look at several of those recommendations. The most notable was the inflation rate assumption, but I know they also had a recommendation with regards to the how the plans account for the interest, the upside crediting on the cash balance plan. So that will be discussed as well. The board hopes to have the funding valuation results, no later than November 15th, which they would present those here to this group as we look forward to the budget discussion in 2024. So with that, that's really all my prepared comments, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that any members may have.
Okay, we have a few. Co-Chair Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to go back just very briefly to reporting for House Bill 236. It sounded like that you guys didn't really have a whole lot of heartburn about what may or may not need to be done as far as any changes or any reporting. I would just ask that, and I guess what if I heard right is July is when you'll really be taking a deep look at that. Is that correct?
So thankfully, the bill sponsor was willing to work with us. As the bill was originally written, it was going to put a little bit of administrative burden on a group that largely doesn't handle the investment side of things. I can't remember if it was a committee sub or a floor amendment, provided some carve-out language specific to our plan, which really eased that burden and allows us to kind of continue to operate as we were. Baird, again, as a contractually acknowledged fiduciary with full discretion over the assets, was voting our proxies. They do utilize a third-party platform for research, but they just met with us Friday. They're voting each individual stock, individually. Now we only own 21, 22 stocks, so it's not a tremendous burden like some of the other plans that have thousands of holdings. But they had already been doing that. So really, we're not going to have to change anything other than with regards to the written guidelines. The bill does require that the board adopt some level of written guidelines. We can either adopt kind of our own policy, which is probably more like what you'll see TRS and KPPA do. In fact, I think they both already have policies. We've always utilized Baird's. And so the question will be, are we comfortable with everything that's outlined in Baird's policy, or do we need to kind of do our own and then direct them to vote that way? Again, as a representative we have 3 staff members. None of us are investment professionals, regardless of what we did in our prior lives. It's some of these plans have proxy voting policies that are hundreds of pages long, and there are a lot of topics. And so, we want to just make sure that we're comfortable that we are acting in the best interests of our members. And I'm not sure that drafting a policy on employee compensation and poison pills and who is an eligible trustee puts our members in the best position relative to a fiduciary who's been a partner of the board for 30 years. So I just haven't had a time to really fully look at their policy to make sure that it covers some of the things that House Bill 236 required.
Oh, just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
So I know that the legislation includes a lot of reporting requirements. I would just ask that as part of that, if you see any issues with being able to do what 236 requests or requires, just let us know. If there's any heartburn out there we don't know about yet. And I know you need some time to look at that too, so we would appreciate it. So maybe
I'll do
August time frame, we can come back and take another look, make sure that we're
I appreciate
on track.
that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And boy, it's good to hear. I knew that, but good to hear you re-emphasize that you've moved to level dollar and on that assumption and not percentage of payroll. That's good news. And I know you talked about assumptions, but I don't know how your crystal ball's working today, but do you anticipate any changes in assumptions in this next go round?
Well, I think I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't want to speak on behalf of our board or our inflation assumption was clearly higher as a result of the audit. We were about 0.5% higher. Now, the assumed rate of return is usually you hear a lot of folks talk about a building block approach. It's 2 blocks that kind of come together: the inflation assumption and the real rate of return assumption. I don't. In the past, the trustees have kind of adjusted that real rate of return instead of kind of both, and so our real rate of return is, could be argued is a little bit lower. I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped that rate of return assumption a little bit, given that, the plans are projected to reach 100% funded. You can lower that hurdle a little bit, and you don't have to be quite as aggressive on the investment side. I think the challenge for the trustees is that they have to act in the best interests of all their members. And so, they have legacy members who are in an old benefit tier. They have new members who are part of the cash balance plan, and their benefit is tied to some level upside, right? The more successful the plans are at investing. So they can't just take no risk, right? That would be a disadvantage to those members that are in the cash balance plan. So I think it's finding that balance. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think at 6.5, the plan is already probably near average or slightly below average of where other plans are. But I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't see something dramatic, but I would not be surprised if you saw some incremental change.
Okay. Thank you, Bo. And Representative Tipton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bo, appreciate you being here with us again today. You mentioned inflation. We're all painfully aware of the impact that inflation has had on everybody in our state, and including our retirees. And we hear the talk of COLAs all the time. Just for clarity, when was the last time that the JRP and LRP members received a COLA?
So COLAs have always been tied across kind of all, KPPA and JFRS. So our last COLA was applied effective July 1 of 2011. Okay. I guess that would be considered a fiscal year 2012 COLA, which I think is consistent. And if it's, I may be speaking outside, and so maybe KPPA. I think the COLA amount was the same too, okay, as far as the percentage. Prior to 2009, it was tied to CPI. And so there were a couple of years there, I think they began in the 90s, early 90s, that it may have been, 2.3, 5%. And then the last one was 1.5 as of July 1, 11.
Okay, thank you.
Nope.
Mr. Chair, could I ask an additional question?
Yes, sir.
When we're talking about the cash balance plans for the JRP, LRP members, those members have an option of going in that plan or going into the KERS non-hazardous plan. Do you have any feel for their percentage? What percentages go into each individual plan?
Yeah, so they've always had the option, pre-cash balance or after. It's an interesting dynamic that we're dealing with right now. So I'll answer it two ways. If the new member has any prior service with KERS or CERS that would get them pre-2014, it's almost exclusively they go to KERS. The most recent data I can tell you is we had 55 new judges. So this is, outside of legislature. We had 55 new judges as a result of the elections and terms. Of those 55, we had 36 join KERS. All but 2 had pre-2014 participation dates. So it's a financial, real benefit. Now that leaves, 23 people who did not have JRP service or prior KERS service. And so all but 2 of those came to JRP. You don't have as many folks on the legislative side that have, the pre-public service. So we had a possibility of 32 new legislators with regards to the 2023 January 1 new term beginning. 18 came to LRP, 14 stayed at KERS, so it's about a little over half. But half of those 14 already had some service either with KERS or CERS. So my general rule of thumb is about 2 out of 3 will come to JFRS if there's no incentive. And so I think, that's probably a pretty good guess. 2 out of 3. On the JRP, it seems to be that most of the judges want to be here, and so they almost all come to JFRS.
Thank you. Thank you, Bo. Seeing no further questions, thank you for being here today.
Well, just full disclosure, I'm on my own today. My office is unstaffed, so I'm going to exit stage left, not because I'm not interested, but if anyone has a question, I know Brad, Senator Higdon, either of the chairs, are feel free to reach out and let me know, and I'll be glad to circle back as quickly as I can.
Thank you, Bo. Next up, KPPA. I'd like to come up and introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, you want us to introduce ourselves?
Please, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm David Eager. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority.
Hi, I'm Erin Surratt. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Benefits.
I'm Liza Welch. I'm the Division Director for Disability and Survivor Benefits.
Okay, please proceed.
Sure. I usually do, or always do, start off with a thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to speak at PPOB, but we also appreciate the fact that we've been getting full funding since 2014, and we've been getting additional appropriations. Both last year, $215 million to the state police, which took the contribution rate from 27% to 50%, and it took the took the contribution rate from 147% down to 99%. took the funded status from 27% up to a little over 50%. That was last year. This year, we've already received $180 million, and we'll receive up to $240 by the end of the year. You'll see the impact of that on our cash flow. We also have 4 of the 5 insurance trusts are overfunded. The one that's not is just under 80%. So most of you may know, most states don't they don't pre-fund their health insurance, and we do. So we're one step up, and we're overfunded in 4 of the 5 trusts. So that's the good news.
Mr. Eager, don't forget to mention House Bill 551 to put some tokens in your treasury starting. I guess when it's implemented, the sports gaming.
Well, I can't speak specifically to that. I know I can't give you the numbers, but yes, 551 will provide additional revenue to us. I look forward to the day when the good news is that the rating agencies improve the ratings on Kentucky's bonds. I don't know the exact criteria or where the line that we have to cross to get there, but I really look forward to it. The legislature have been doing, making initiatives since 2014 that have improved the systems. New Jersey in 2022 got a bump by all 3 rating agencies, and in March of this year they've gotten another bump for 2 of the agencies. And if you look overall, they're not in any significantly better funded position than we are. Unfortunately, our state plan is the worst of the 5 pension plans that K9 has, but we're moving in the right direction. Go ahead. I'll give you some highlights here that you'll see as we go. I'm going to go through investment performance and cash flow. Cash flow years ago got very little attention, but it really needs it. We don't want to be in a position where we're having to sell securities in order to make benefit payments. But with regard to the investments, we are on track to have all of the 5 plans exceed their assumptions. I say on track because we're largely there or just there as long as the final 3 months of the year hold up. From a cash flow standpoint, by the way, we are exceeding our benchmarks with every one of the pension and insurance funds. Cash flow, we're cash flow positive with 6 of the 10 funds, and the 10 being 5 pension and 5 insurance. But 6 of the 10 are positive cash flow. The 4 aren't. The 4 that aren't are negative in total by $32 million. The 6 that are positive by $431 million. So if you look at the aggregate numbers, we're in excellent shape. You'll see more detail in a minute. We're in excellent shape on cash flow. I'm going to show you this because it tells a story. It tells the story of diversification. This is the 3rd quarter returns for a variety of asset categories. And as you know, we allocate assets in a very specific and thoughtful way to investments that tie to many of these asset classes. Look at the top. Wilshire LT growth in the 3rd quarter, up 15.9. Look 3 from the bottom. Wilshire large cap value, up 1%. This really demonstrates the need for diversification. We can't. If we had half of our money in growth and half in value, we'd average out at about let's say 5%. 7%. And if you look at the FT, about 5 down, 5 or 6 down. The FT Wilshire 5,000 up 7.3. So if you had half your assets in one and half in the other, you'd be doing about 7%. And I can tell you that there are periods of time recently when those numbers would flip-flop. So we don't want all of our money in either one of those with the volatility it has. But by balancing it out, we smooth out our returns. Go ahead. So here is the pension returns as of unaudited, preliminary, but as of March 31st of 2023. I want to focus on the second column, which is fiscal year to date, and this is what I commented about looking like we'll meet our assumptions. K9 has is up 4.3, index is up 4.2, and similarly 6%, 6.4 for C9 has, 6.5 and 5, and all of those are exceeding their planned index benchmarks. The index benchmark says it's our targeted asset allocation earning the market returns. So by either overweighting or underweighting properly, or picking managers or picking stocks that outperform. In all 5 of those categories, we've exceeded. For every 1% we're able to beat the benchmark, it's worth $230 million. So even a 0.5% increase, $115 million more than had we simply invested in index funds at the targeted allocation. Longer term, returns don't fluctuate that great year to year, so we've been asked to provide 30-year returns at 7.5, 7.6, 7.5, pretty consistent. I think Bo's numbers were in the 8s, mid-8s, and it comes back to the fact that we have much less allocation to equities than the teachers do, and they've benefited by that, by the higher returns that equities have earned. Insurance is going to look pretty much the same. The allocations in insurance for K-9 has and state police are geared more highly toward equities, so the returns there are going to be higher. But again, we're in the 6% range, and barring any kind of a problem, we should be exceeding our benchmarks. Let's go to cash flow. Let me walk you down the a vertical column here. The first column, fiscal 23, K-9 has. I'll just kind of walk you through the methodologies. First number, $69 million. That's what we got from member contributions. You will know it's up from fiscal 22 because of largely because of the 8% increase in compensation, salaries. Employer contributions, $75 million. We'll call it the House Bill 8 number is $599 million. It's $9 million less than it was last year. Some of that will be attributable to a variety of reasons, but at the end of the year we'll dissect that. Compare it to what it would have been had we not had House Bill 8. Last year there was about a $25 million savings. I think there'll be something in that order again this year. Net investment income is 53.8, up from a year ago because of higher interest rates. Benefit payments roughly flat, 689.9. Administrative expenses 8.7. So we had total cash inflows of 976 and outflows of 698. We had a net contribution of $278 million. That's incredible if you look at other retirement systems. We also had $44 million in unrealized and realized gains, so change in the position was $322 million. I say there's 3 ways to look at cash flow. One simply says, what are we drawing in contributions, and what are we paying out in benefits and expenses, and is that a positive or negative number? That's number one. Number 2 says, all right, you're also getting income from investments, dividends and interest. What's the impact there? And the final one says, let's throw in the gain or loss. It's not really a cash flow, but it's just a change in the values. And I think the second one is the most important if you're wanting to talk about liquidity in the plan. Are we getting enough cash in excess income versus benefits and expenses and investment income from dividends and interest? Are we getting enough that we don't have to sell securities to make distributions? That's a key one.
And I want to commend you that you're actually a pay-as-you-go. We have enough income every year with the commitment. We have our 2A and R chairs here. They make that commitment every year. Representative Petrie and Senator McDaniel that, would you say, $180 million in state contribution to?
So far, yes.
So far?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I jumped over that number. I apologize. That's a big number sitting there. 5 down from the top. General fund appropriation, $180 million. Last year was 0. Again, the state police last year, in June, when we get to June, they'll show a $215 million number. Thank you for pointing that out. But we've been asked also to say, what's the net contribution as a percent of the cash flow? As a percent of the assets, rather. And the net contribution of $224 million is 6.6% of the assets. And if you looked at, I was searching for data recently. I can't find enough of it, but my experience would say that the typical plan is negative cash flow 1 to 3%. So they're at that point in time, they're relying on gains in investment income and gains, market value gains, in order to have their funds grow. I can walk through all of the others if you choose. I think, again, cash flow is in aggregate, very positive. In 6 out of the 10, it's positive and improving in almost every one of them.
Representative Tipton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave, appreciate you all being here. You pointed out, and I understand the reason for the member contribution increase, particularly in the state police on a percentage basis. My question goes to the employer contributions. As those salaries have increased, why are employer contributions down so much in KERS non-HAS, and they're also down in the state police retirement system? And could you give some clarity to that?
Yeah, I'll speak to the K9HAS, which is the big one. In fiscal 22, there was a misallocation of contributions between insurance and pensions. And I'm being corrected. I didn't think that was the case. Aaron, step in. Okay. I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
I think the actuarial contribution, the unfunded liabilities gone down. So normal costs went down, as did payments to House Bill 8.
But is that tied to House Bill 8?
Yes.
Okay. I'm being told it's the impact by our financial person that's the effect of House Bill 8. There's also a similar reduction in the C side for a different reason. Right, Brian? Yeah, please. I apologize. We're going to have to come back to you with an explanation on the K, because I was told it was impacted C but not K. But I thought it was the other way around. I will clarify that. My apologies. The pension contribution on C, we have contribution inflows of 635, outflows of 623, a net of 12. Realized and unrealized gains were 281, so the change in the positions 293. It took the fund from 8.0 billion to 8.35 billion. We did have net negative contributions of 98.6 or 1%, and that falls within that range I talked about of 1 to 3% being kind of more normal. Insurance. I'll call your attention to the middle column, where that's the impact of no employer contributions or actual accrued liabilities. That's the result of the plan being overfunded for several years. Back to the left, K9HAS, which is not overfunded. Employer contributions were 23 million. The actuarial accrued liability contributions 58. Dropped down to investment income was 19. The total cash inflow is 115. The outflow in the red column, red row, is 76. So we had net contributions of 39, realized gains of 45, total of 84. And the funds went from 1.3 billion to 1.386 billion. The cash flow was positive 1.42%. And the yield on the portfolio was 1.4. I kind of go back to the cash flow is extremely good in aggregate. Again, it's 431 in aggregate positive and 32 where it was negative. So we feel good about where we stand with regard to cash flow. And a lot of that comes from the fact we're getting these higher contribution rates and the additional appropriations. On the C side, not quite as good a picture, but it's not critical. Net cash inflow in the blue is 127.5. Outflow is 92.1. Net was 35. Realized gains 106. Change in position 142. But net contributions were negative 9.1. So we were relying on investment income to create the positive 35 million. Net contribution of 35 million included 44 million of net investment income. When you strip that out, it brings it down to a negative 9, a negative 0.29%. We had a yield of 1.42 on the portfolio. And again, if you look versus 0.83 a year ago, so that's the increase in interest rates and the impact it has. Legislative update. Any questions, by the way, before we move on to that? Legislative update. First, quickly, statutes require that the Senate appointments be ratified by or confirmed by the Senate, and we did get Lynn Hampton, Ramsey Bova, and William Summers confirmed in this session. It's been all three trustees have been sworn in and are actively participating in the boards. Senate Bill 20, prohibiting the use of or download of TikTok on any state government network or any state government issued device. As far as implementation is complete, I've talked with our IT people. We have never been aware of a TikTok issue in the past, and it's prohibited going forward. So I think we're in compliance. House Bill 236. This is a bill that got a lot of discussion. It doesn't really change a whole lot of what we do as it relates to the investments. It does with it relates to proxies, but it says that we as fiduciaries can only consider pecuniary factors when making investment decisions. And what are those factors? It's a factor that would affect in some way the financial aspect of a corporation. It would affect its cash flow. It would affect its earnings. It would affect its leverage, whatever it might be. That could be positive or negative. But we're looking at. We're only making decisions on those kind of factors. We're not making on non-pecuniary factors such as the makeup of a board of directors or the fact that they're an energy company. And we ought to, there are many states now that are prohibiting investments, many state plans prohibiting investments in energy companies. So we have never done that, and the bill requires that we not do it going forward. So that's never been an issue. We have investment policy statements for the C and the K plans that state exactly that. It also requires CERS and KRS boards to adopt proxy voting policies and to ensure that all proxy votes are executed either by the board or staff designated or proxy voting service. The boards have approved proxy voting statements. We are working with our investment managers who manage equity securities on getting them to agree to comply to our proxy voting. And they all, to my knowledge, utilize ISS as the proxy voting service. Of the 12 managers that we have that hold equities, 9 have come into compliance and have agreed. 2 were very close and just kind of finalizing the agreement and the paperwork. And 1, there are some added negotiations that need to take place. I'm hopeful it will resolve those soon. If we can't, then we'll have to move on and move away from that manager. I will say it does require proxy voting be reported to the on a quarterly basis. We're looking at how much additional work that's going to take and how we can do it most effectively. And to Representative Johnson's point, if it looks like there's a problem, we'll raise our hand.
That's a good place for Co-Chair Johnson does have a question.
Nice segue. Just very briefly, I just want to make sure that we're fully understand where we are here in your implementation process. Let me back up first. Your bullet 4 on summary require the quarterly reports. When do you anticipate the first quarterly report? I would think that maybe the end of June we could start hearing these reports, but you may know something that I don't.
I think we'll try to make that happen. The bill goes into effect June 29th, 2023. We hope by June 30th we'll be able to do that.
Yep. You already know about it, so I would think we should be able to do that.
Yeah, right now they come in different forms. That's part of the issue, is to try to get them into a common form.
Okay.
Each of the managers have them. We'll submit them in a different format, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to consolidate that.
Great. All right. And then one more question, if I may. So in your implementation process bullets, you mentioned bullet number 1, existing investment policy statements are in full or are already in place and in compliance with House Bill 236. So is that saying that your current policies are in full compliance with the second bullet in your summary area with respect to environmental, social, and political and ideological interests? Easy for me to say.
Yeah.
Are you in compliance with that now, both CERS and KERS?
We always have been, but as it relates to the proxy voting, there are the 3 situations where two were in the very final negotiation to get it done, and 1 we're still working. So we are in compliance. I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this. Well, 9 of the managers were in compliance, and 2 were close to closing that. It'll be closed by June, and if we can't get the third one closed, we're going to have to move on. So that may be an overstatement as I read it.
Okay.
The proxy statements are in place. That's correct.
I will be very interested to hear in June or thereabouts what happened with these ones that you're still having to negotiate with.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Yeah.
Okay, House Bill 506, it reinstates.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, but Auditor Harmon had a question. I want to get him in there before we get started on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is along the lines of what was just asked as well, but I just want to confirm. So if someone adopts a proxy voting service, then that we have already entered into contracts, or they are familiar that the only way they can vote our proxies is in a pecuniary factors. They cannot utilize any other factors, even the proxy voting service itself.
That's correct. They will vote according to our proxy voting policy.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, House Bill 506, it reinstates the partial lump sum option as a retirement payment option. And what that allows, it allows for a member to take a lump sum amount in addition to a reduced monthly benefit. It also changes the required break-in service for retired reemployed members to 1 calendar month for all retirees. That's non-hazardous and hazardous alike. The effective date of the bill is January 1st, 2024. So that means for retirement dates, January 1st, 2024, that payment option will be available, and the break-in service will change for those people. We're in process with the design. Design teams are already meeting. We need new factors from the actuary. We're updating correspondence and publication, but we expect everything to be completed in the fall of 2023.
House Bill 587 exempts the KPPA internal auditor position from being from hiring and employment provisions in 18A, 45A, and 640, and that the auditor will report directly to the KPPA board or board subcommittee. The authority will conduct an annual performance review of that position. I would say that effectively this is the way we have operated, with the exception that that person was not exempt from 18A, 45A, and 640, nor were they getting an annual performance review. But the reporting relationship to the board and the audit committee is essentially being maintained as it was. Implementation, our staff has prepared a memo to the KPPA board outlining the requirements of the steps for complying with 587. The memo is going to be discussed at our board meeting on April 27th. Our annual meeting. There's a lot of there are certainly specific things in the bill, but there are things that are not specific, as simple as who approves timesheets. We're going to work with the board to determine, do they want to take on those kind of roles, or are there certain administrative things they want to rely on the staff to do? So that's incorporated in the memo that's going to be reviewed on the 27th. Suggested timeline is that we'll have these accomplished by during April to June of 2023. I think the specific date is June the 13th. We will be done by that time. That's 90 days after the signing of the bill. Actuarial assumption update. So GRS is finalizing the experience study for both the economic and demographic assumptions for CERS and KRS. They are within a week of having them completed. So we anticipate them to be ready in the next couple of weeks. This was written a week ago. Once the boards have the opportunity to review the material, they'll decide on making assumptions. They have C and K both have their board meetings in early June, and that's when the assumptions will be discussed using these experience studies. So, and they have House Bill 76, the economic experience must be reviewed again no later than 2025. Demographic experience must be studied again no later than 2028. The boards will likely reevaluate the need for either of the assumptions annually, but at least on a minimum every 2 years. So the question came up earlier about changes in assumptions. That's the C and the K boards will make those decisions. KPPA does not do that. We don't have the authority to. I think it'll be a robust discussion, perhaps, with interest rates having risen and equity values having come down. We do have what by industry standards pretty conservative assumptions, either 5 1/4 or 6 1/4. So I would invite you, and I will mention that all of our meetings are on Facebook. If you want to listen in on those discussions, you're welcome to go to Facebook and watch them.
Okay, we'll move on to the line of duty disability and death benefits update. We were asked to provide a high-level overview of line of duty benefits and some recent legislation that has enhanced some of those benefits. First, we'd like to just go over what is a line of duty incident. A line of duty incident is a single traumatic event or act of violence that occurs as a result of performing one's job duties or is related to one's job duties. So that is what a line of duty incident is. There's also, in addition to that, there are total and permanent benefits, and a total and permanent line of duty means a disability which results in the member's incapacity to engage in any occupation for remuneration or profit. So one thing that I did want to point out that is a distinction between hazardous and non-hazardous is that hazardous members are covered under these benefits as soon as they clock in on day one. Non-hazardous members have to have a month of service credit, meaning that they would have to have worked enough, at least 100 hours in a month or 80 hours if it's for a school board to qualify for the benefits. Also, by definition, any non-hazardous line of duty is total and permanent by definition. But I'll give some more information as we go along. Some of the recent legislative changes in the past few years that enhanced some of these benefits. In 2018, House Bill 185 stated in the case of a line of duty death, the spouse becomes the beneficiary, regardless of who is named beneficiary or if there is no named beneficiary. If there is no surviving spouse, it provides benefits payable to eligible dependent children. It also added monthly average pay to the calculation of benefits. So it now considers the higher of the final rate of pay or the average monthly creditable comp amount. So the final rate of pay is the actual rate at which the member was being paid in the previous 12 months prior to the retirement date annualized. And then the average monthly creditable comp is what they actually earned in those 12 months immediately preceding the retirement date. So the minimum benefit changed from 25% of FROP to 75% of MAP, of the monthly average pay. It also expanded the definition of dependent child to include disabled dependent in the case of a member death, and the health insurance benefits for the spouse and dependent children pays 100% of the contribution rate regardless of the member's insurance tier based on their participation date. House Bill 271 in 2020 removed the provision that the benefit would be recalculated to 25% of MAP if the surviving spouse remarries. So the benefit does not change if the spouse remarries once they've started receiving benefits. And then Senate Bill 169 in 2021, the minimum disability retirement benefit for any hazardous member or a non-hazardous member in a position that can be certified as hazardous who is approved for total and permanent changed from 25% of FROP to 75% of MAP, like the benefits that were in the death in line of duty. So again, like I mentioned before, all non-hazardous line of duty are by definition total and permanent, but they only get the enhanced benefit if that position can be certified as a hazardous position. This one also expanded the definition of dependent child to include a disabled dependent for total and permanent line of duty benefits, and the health insurance benefit for the member, spouse, and dependent children pays 100% of the contribution rate, regardless of the member's insurance tier. So I think an important thing to state here is that while the benefits were enhanced in these situations, the standard by which a member can be approved for these total and permanent disability did not change. So, and here we just have a few statistics. These are our comparing our new disability retirement recipients in fiscal year 21 and 22. We have the total number of recipients, and then we have, you can see in 2021, there was one individual who was approved for hazardous total and permanent in line of duty, and so receiving those enhanced benefits. And then in 2022, and that was in K hazardous, and then in 2022 we also had one member who qualified for those enhanced benefits, and that was in CERS hazardous. Just a matter of difference for if you see in line of duty, that refers to hazardous members. Duty related is non-hazardous members, as it's spelled out in statutes. Then we have, just looking at all of the total in line of duty and duty related recipients that we have across the plans in this next graph, and then those who qualify for the enhanced benefit under the total and permanent enhanced benefit. So we have that broken down by plan, and you can see that there are 4 members who are receiving that those enhanced benefits. And then for the active death survivor benefits, again, we've compared fiscal year 21 and 22, showing the total deaths and the duty related and the in line of duty deaths that would have received the enhanced benefit here. Another point to make, the legislation in Senate Senate Bill 169 also required that we report to the PPOB in November of each year the number of members who qualify for these benefits, as well as the amount of the total amount of benefits that are being paid out by plan.
Do you mind explaining the that last new active death survivor benefits? The numbers, there's some fairly large numbers on there. Can you explain a little better or a little more in depth what those numbers mean, please?
Absolutely. So in 2021, the total number of active members who died, there were 660 total. And in 2022, as compared to 725. 400, if we go back to 2021, 447 of those were in CERS non-HAS. 16 were in CERS HAS. 176 were KERS non-HAS. And then in the next column, the KERS non-HAS duty related, that's where they received the increased benefits based on what House Bill 185 provided. And then we had 21 in KERS hazardous, and then 0 in the remainder of those columns. So there was one member who received out of the 660 that received the increased enhanced benefit, I'm sorry.
And that would be killed in the line of duty? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
And so there was 1 in 21 and 2 in 22.
There were 2 in K non-HAS. There was 1 in C HAS. And so for a total, and 1 in C non-HAS for a total of 4 in 2022 that received the enhanced benefits.
That's 4 too many, and
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
it's a lot of families that are affected. Okay, I better understand it now.
Great.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
Co-Chair Johnson has a question.
Just a couple of quick wrap-up questions, if I could.
Okay.
So you are live streaming online all of your boards and committee meetings at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've been doing it since 2019, I believe, and you go to our website.
And you anticipate continuing to do that?
We are.
Good. And then last question.
And, by the way, and committee meetings.
And committee meetings. Right.
With the exception of the Administrative Appeals.
Understand. Last question. So every 5 years, there's a auditor requirement, a state audit requirement. Are you guys on deck for this year? Is that right?
We are. We've had a launch meeting very recently. We are. Yes, we're on deck.
Enjoy the process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would say, I say this all the time, we look forward to audits. So we're not doing something right, we need to know it. And if we're doing something right, we need to know that as well. So
Great attitude. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. One last question. I don't see any others, Dave. On the actuarial audit we just completed for all the systems and the recommendations that were made. We'll have a meeting later on to talk about those, but I'm sure you've looked at those and quite familiar with the recommendations that the auditors made.
Oh, the Milliman?
Yes.
Yes, and we've responded to it. I can comment very briefly that they found essentially no exceptions of significance.
Okay.
You know,
Well, like I said, we'll talk about that in
Yeah.
a little more in depth at another meeting.
yeah, that was the bottom line. I do owe you, in my notes, I owe you some clarification on the issue of contributions and the insurance, and between the K plan and the C plan, the discussion we had as to where it fit and what caused it. And I will follow up on the 3 investment managers we're working to conclude the proxy voting. As that process concludes, I'll let you know.
Well, I do want to say, we talked about this, death survivor benefits. You know, we had 4 state employees, hazardous, non-hazardous, that were killed in line of duty. We appreciate all of our state employees and the hazardous duty, those that put their life on the line every day. These benefits are just small token for the family, and I'm glad the General Assembly saw fit to increase those benefits from 25% to 75%, and so glad we did that. And I'm really sorry that somebody has to collect those, but we just want to keep those folks in mind, because it is tough out there.
And we appreciate that.
No further questions? Thank you, and we'll talk to you again next month. Thank you. Next up, save the best for last. Bo, good to see you again. It's been you got a little recess from us. Good to see you back. The floor is yours. Please proceed.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Bo Barnes, Deputy Executive Secretary and General Counsel for the Teachers Retirement System. And asked to give a brief overview on a couple of items today, and I'll start right ahead with that. And first, we have investment performance returns, and this slide reflects investment returns for the Retirement Annuity Trust that pays the pension as of March 31st, 2023. These are unaudited and preliminary. They're pretty new, so but we want to provide you with the most recent information that we have, the most recent data. So we'll start at the bottom line on the far left-hand corner, net. So for the quarter, for the 3 months of this calendar year, you see a 4.54% return. Fiscal year to date, 6.45% return. 1 year return is negative 4.56%. 3 year return is 12.02%. 5 year is 6.77%, and then I'm going to have to jump up to the line just above it to complete the 10 and 20 year returns, because we don't have the net of fees information yet. So these are gross returns. You see for the 10 year it's 8.2%, the 20 year 7.7%. Of course, we are a long-term investor, and projections for the 30 year return looks like it's going to be probably just a little bit above 7.5%. Our assumed rate of return is 7.1%. Moving to the next slide, same data for the health insurance trust. And again, these are preliminary. So we'll start where we started on the previous slide at the bottom left-hand corner. For the quarter, returns were 4.6% for the health insurance trust, 7.07% fiscal year to date. 1 year was negative 4.15, 3 year 12.38%. 5 year 6.74%, and then jumping up to the line just above, 10 year 7.17%. And we don't have data beyond that at this point in time, but that would be available next month if you'd like to have that extrapolated on further. And then with the as with the retirement annuity trust, the health insurance trust has an assumed rate of return of 7.1%. Cash flow. Okay, this is the cash flow for the retirement annuity trust. And then, as always, whenever I discuss this slide, you know, we always talk about we're going to cover it in thirds. The top third, cash inflow, the middle third, cash outflow, and the bottom third of this slide is kind of the net results of those cash inflows and outflows. So you can see the far right-hand columns. The one further to the right is fiscal year to date 2022. So July 1st, of 2022 through, and this goes through February 28th. We don't have the March 31st numbers yet. So for those first months of the fiscal year, then just to the left of it, you have fiscal year to date for 2023. And I'll just go over those numbers quickly. We'll start at the very top. You will see that member contributions increased slightly for the two periods from 2022 to 2023, from $214 million to $222 million. Employer contributions down slightly from $821 million to $790 million. Investment income and this is stock dividends and fixed income, interest on fixed income bonds, $236 million in 2022, up slightly to $244 million in 2023. So total cash inflows just very slightly less, from $1,272,000,000 in 2022 to $1,257,000,000 in 2023. So now we're going to move to the middle third of this slide, which reflects cash outflows. And we'll see that the top line there, that benefits and refunds that were paid out, mostly benefits though, rose slightly for the two time periods, from $1,557,000,000 in 2022 to $1,616,000,000 in 2023. Administrative expense is up slightly from $9.7 million to $11 million. A lot of that, of course, was the 8% across the board compensation increase for all state employees. And you'll see the total outflows increased slightly for the two periods, from $1.567 billion to $1.627 billion. So cash flow for 2022 for that period of time was a negative $294 million, increased to a negative $360 million for the same period for 2020 for this fiscal year. And you'll see, and this is the very important line, the next line here, the investment gains or losses, because what we've seen above in the top of this chart, or the top of this slide, just really tells part of the story, because during that period of time we also saw investment gains, which you heard Bo Craycraft discuss earlier, which were both realized and unrealized. So you see, comparing the two periods, it was a negative $568 million for the fiscal year period 2022, and it's up to a positive $855 million for the same period for 2023. Assets rose from January 1st of this calendar year from $22.9 billion to $22.386 billion. So we saw some improvement there, down slightly from the prior period in 2022. With that, I'll go to the next slide. This is the same slide, same format, but for the Health Insurance Trust. And again, just moving over these numbers very quickly. Member contributions increased for the two time periods from $127 million to $132 million. Employer contributions increased from $102 million to $142 million. Recovery income, these are prescription drug rebates, federal subsidies that we work hard to make sure that we obtain, increased from $95.8 million to $98.5 million. Investment income also improved from $7.9 million to $16.9 million. So improvement there. And total cash inflows increased for the two time periods from $332 million in 2022 to $391 million in 2023. Cash outflows, this is largely the benefit payments, increased slightly from $206.9 million to $216.5 million. So total, and that reflects also the total cash flows. Administrative expense is something that we do at the end of the fiscal year because it's part of our overall administrative expense, salaries, and at the end of the year we break out what salaries, for example, are going towards the health insurance department versus the rest of the departments at TRS. So cash flow for the period of time is $125.8 million for the time period in 2022, and it rose to $174.7 million for the same period for 2023. Again, in looking at the very important line, investment gains or losses, realized or unrealized, we see that we were negative $21.9 million in 2022, positive $89.7 million in 2023, and we have seen the Health Insurance Trust continue to grow well from just the beginning of this calendar year from $2.269 billion to $2.533 billion. So very good growth in the Health Insurance Trust as a result of that shared responsibility legislation from 2010. Our active teachers, retired teachers, school districts are all paying more into the Health Insurance Trust to make that a pre-funded benefit. Next slide. We were also asked to provide a legislative update, and there's really only one bill I have to talk about that today, and you've heard about it with the previous speakers, and that's House Bill 236. House Bill 236, again, it codifies in greater detail what it means, for example, to be a fiduciary with investments. And that means that you're investing only solely for pecuniary interest and not non-pecuniary interest like environmental, social, governance, ESG, or ideological reasons. And that is something that we do at TRS, so it's not really a policy change for us. We have a annual trustee workshop, and all of our trustees we have a presentation on what it means to be a fiduciary and with investments, and that is maximum return within acceptable levels of risk. So there are some additional reporting requirements too with House Bill 236. We've already been discussing, had many meetings on House Bill 236 already, and we'll be ready to implement those. House Bill 236 also provides some details and requirements for proxy advisors and people who provide proxy voting services. As you've heard me testify here before, we are currently using Institutional Shareholder Services, or ISS. Our board at its last meeting and after the passage of this House Bill 236 decided to issue a request for proposals and solicit bids from all the entities out there that provide proxy voting advice and services, and we're in the middle of that process right now. We're still accepting bids, so that's ongoing. Let's see. Again, we are required by 161.430. We have been, and we are now with more detail provided by House Bill 236. Again, investments are made only to achieve maximum returns within acceptable levels of risk. Likewise, our shares of stock that we hold, those proxies are voted in the best interest of the membership and just only to further pecuniary interest and not any other interest. That's how we invest at TRS. And then finally, a report on House Bill 76 from the 2022 session. And that bill requires an experience study for economic assumptions to be done every 2 years. Instead of 5 as we normally do it. So we've been meeting with the actuary. This was reported to the board. We've been meeting with the actuary about making sure that we have those actuarial assumptions reviewed and in time for the 2023 fiscal year actuarial evaluation, which will be submitted and ready and submitted by November 15th. We're just waiting on some key capital market assumption numbers to come in from certain entities like Aon. Our actuary will review those because they not only look what's happened in the past, but they're also trying to project what the capital markets will be in the future. So I think that's all I had. If there's any questions, be more than happy to take those.
Okay, we have a few questions for you. Co-Chair Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two very quick ones. I think they're quick. So with reference to House Bill 236, in summary of what your statements were, would you say that TRS is in full compliance with House Bill 236, or just wrapping up some loose ends to make sure you're in full compliance?
In full compliance, there's some additional requirements that didn't exist before, like reporting proxy votes quarterly. That's something we'll start doing, but we have been in full compliance because, again, I've been there for almost 24 years, and with investments, it's always been about what's the best investment, the best value for the maximum returns, and again, but critically important too, acceptable levels of risk.
Right, and I asked this question previously, so do you think June 30th we can get a report on that?
Yes, sir.
That time frame? Great. Last question is just kind of a general question. Are you still live streaming TRS meetings, board meetings, committee meetings?
All our meetings are in person, so they're not being live streamed right now. They were during the pandemic, but we went back to a in-person format for our meetings.
So is there no way for membership to watch the meetings when they're happening online?
Not now. We provide notice to stakeholder groups of board meetings, advise them when and where it's going to be. They're open to the public under the Open Meetings Act, but they're not being live streamed right now. No.
Is there some kind of technological issue that would keep you from being able to do that? You think? I just think it would be better if those meetings were open online. I don't see any reason why you couldn't do it. Maybe there is. I just don't know what it would be.
I'd be glad to check with IT. I know sometimes there were glitches, with the technology, but I'd be glad to check with them and report back.
I'm still working on transparency.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Mills.
Thank you. Just a question on 236. The RFP you said you have put out on the proxy side of it. Did that have a statement in there, or did it state what our requirements are under 236 so
Yeah.
that they know what they're bidding on specifically?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I neglected to mention that, but the RFP itself contains a lot of the wording from House Bill 236, and a copy of House Bill 236 in full was attached to the RFP, and it was made a condition of submitting a bid is that you have to agree to all of the terms of House Bill 236.
Perfect. Thank you.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see I have 35 minutes. Just teasing there,
started.
Bo. Looking at the health insurance trust and the cash flow update, it's good to see that number up over 2.5 billion. We recouped some of the losses we had. Do you know what offhand what the current funding level on the health insurance trust is for TRS?
Yes, so the health insurance trust, we're at 63.7% as of June 30th, 2022.
Okay, thank you. And also on that page, similar question to question on KPPA on employer contributions. The member contributions are up 5.9 million, but the employer contributions are up 40.9 million. Is there a specific reason why those contributions were so much higher from one fiscal year to another?
On the health insurance trust, sir?
I was looking on the that's on the health insurance trust. Yes.
What he talks about.
Not sure offhand why that would, but I can
Okay.
find out for you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, I'll make one additional question.
Please proceed.
Okay, and one comment on behalf of Representative Duplessis. We're still watching the cash flow balance, but the question I had was when we did the budget in fiscal year 22, I believe the total appropriation to TRS was around 1.2 billion. About 1.1 of that from the state. I know you got the additional green box dollars, but am I correct that the TRS actuary has said by 2032 that the required contribution will be $2 billion?
I believe that's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, of that additional $800 million, where's that? How much of that's going to be coming from the taxpayers of Kentucky?
Well, the Commonwealth contributes a fixed percentage on salaries as those go up, as you're aware, and there's the additional appropriation so that the full ADEC is met.
Sure.
So that will be, some of that the member makes a percentage contribution on their salary too. So as their salaries go up,
Sure.
as with the state, the contributions go up. But a lot of that's going to have to be made up by the ADEC, which, at some point in time, we will see when we get to a fully funded, 100% funded retirement annuity trust, and there's a point in time where that will happen, then the contributions made by the state towards TRS will be slashed dramatically.
Sure. I believe that's around 2045, 2046. We got a lot of years before we get there.
Yes, sir.
Offhand, do you remember what the projected funding level would be in 2032 when we get to that $2 billion mark?
Not offhand, not for
Okay.
that particular year.
But it's still a long way from 100%.
We're going to start seeing some acceleration in the funded level in a few short years. And again, it's sort of akin to, your home mortgage. In the early years, you're paying mostly interest and little principal. We're kind of at that point, we're earlier in the mortgage, but we're only a few years out. We're going to see a more dramatic acceleration of funded status.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Mills, Senator Mills, you still have another one? Okay. Bo, we always have a question about cash flow, and I think Representative Tipton covered that pretty good. So thank you on that, and that's always a concern. I know that, but one of the questions I had as we talked in the last interim about sick day reporting from the schools to TR, or from the, down at the local level to TRS. And you told me at the time there was no reports from them to you, and that you really didn't know the actual liability each year that's out there. You didn't know the liability till the person actually retired.
Well, they report, yes, the school districts report the sick days at the time of retirement. Our actuary does project a liability for sick leave based on what we know. And that, we know we still have that active teacher sick leave liability out there that we're paying it off slowly too on an amortized basis, just as we are with all the liabilities for all the benefits in the pension side.
You know, I'd like to, I think it'd be good to know that liability, the true liability every year, instead of the actuaries making an estimate of what it is. Instead of passing legislation to require that being done, can TRS ask for that information on a yearly basis for the actuaries, where we have actual figures instead of assumptions?
I would assume we could ask for it. There wouldn't necessarily be a requirement for the districts to provide it. You know, we might have some that do it and some don't. I don't know, but I think we could ask for it. Probably need to give that a little thought about how we would do that, and what we'd be collecting, and make sure I understand exactly what it is you want.
I mean, you saw the legislation last year that I filed. It just said that they would report to you each year, and so that's. I just think accountability is good, especially when we're talking about anticipating in 2032 that our legislative, or the ADAC ask will be $2 billion, and that's. But you know, I understand there's a lot of moving parts to that, but we just simply ran out of time before we got that passed this time.
Yes, sir. And if I may, just really quickly, about cash flow, it is still very manageable. We're about 2.6%, and actuarials will say that's acceptable. Before we got the additional funding that we got in 2017, we were in a bad place. Negative cash flow was growing to an unacceptable and unmanageable level. With additional funding, which we're very thankful for, that's just turned all that around completely. And it's also helping us with our investments. You know, we can now buy when we want to buy and not have to sell if we don't want to sell. So very appreciative of that.
Thank you. Any other questions? That looks like that's no further questions. Thank you for being here. Always good to hear from you.
Thank you.
We did pass several pieces of legislation to deal with pensions this time, and we did vet those in this committee. I think that worked out very well. If no objections, we'll continue that policy. Seeing no further business on the agenda, motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.